Hello and welcome back to Just Makes Stuff. Today we're going to be mending some worn out parts of my handmade socks. I have quite the collection of hand knitted socks at this point. I knitted my first pair of socks a couple of years ago and I found that I loved wearing them so much that I promptly started knitting more and more until now I wear hand knitted socks almost exclusively. But of course, over time, these socks do get some wear and tear. And you can see that if you look at the bottom of the sock. This pair of socks is still quite fresh, really. These are about the same age. They were made at the same time, roughly, using the same yarn. And these, when you look at them, there's no real significant wear. There's only a tiny bit of fading here at the heel. But this other pair of socks, when you open this up, the thing that you can see is this worn out part where those threads have been worn almost down to nothing. And you can also see that there's quite a bit more fading and even a little bit of felting on this pair of socks because they have been simply worn more often. Now, with hand knitted socks, these were made about 2 years ago and they've been worn a lot. So today, to extend the life of this pair of socks, we're going to mend this part where it has been worn through. Now, this is not completely worn through. You can still see the stitches where there is this worn out part, but you can see that they are much thinner. The actual fiber there has become very thin. And if I were to wear these much more often before mending them, I would likely end up with one of these threads snapping and I would get a hole. And of course, it's much easier to mend anything if you do the mending before you get a proper hole. So by mending these before a hole completely develops, we should be able to continue wearing these socks for much longer. What we need in order to mend our sock is a darning needle, some scrap yarn in a color that you are happy with, and scissors. You can see that this color is quite different, and partly that is so that it's easier for you to see as I mend this sock about what the process is. You can choose any color that you like, really. I quite like the idea of doing a visible mend on these socks. To start with, I'm going to take a length of the yarn that I'm going to use for my mending. You don't want it to be too long, as you want to be able to manage your needle easily, but you also want to make sure you have plenty of yarn to do your mending. I'm going to take one of my smaller darning needles, nothing too big, as these are quite fine gauge. I'm going to start by threading this needle. And then I'm going to put one hand all the way into this sock so that I can stretch out this place where there is the worn out spot. I want to find all of the edges of the worn out spot. This is a fairly small location that needs to be mended, and I want to make sure that I go a little bit lower than at the beginning of the worn out part and a little bit outside of the worn out part. I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to come up in the center of a stitch. So what you can see is a lot of what might be described as little heart shapes, little V's. We want to come up with our needle just below the bottom of one of those V's. And we need to leave a nice tail for weaving in at the end. And now on that same V, I want to go across the top behind the V that is on top of it or above it. I simply put my needle behind both legs of the V above the V that I have started on. And then I want to go back down where I initially started, where my yarn initially came out. And I'm actually going to go across into the bottom of the next V along to the right. And when I pull that through, you can see I have created one complete new V in this lovely sturdy new yarn. And now I'm going to repeat the process on the stitch beside the V that I have just made. So I go to the top of the V and insert my needle behind both legs of the V above the V that I am working through. And then back down where the yarn came out at the bottom of the V and across to the next one. I don't want to pull these too tight, otherwise I may lose stretchiness in this part of the sock. Now, in this part of the sock, at this level where I have done this line of stitches, I have done all of the stitches that needed reinforcing. So when I go across, I am going to go up into the next row of stitches above the one that I have just mended. So instead of going straight across here, I'm going to go up into the next stitch up. And now I'm going to work back across from right to left this time. So I have my yarn coming out of the bottom of this V. I'm going to take it behind the legs of the V, just on top of it. And then back down into the bottom of the V. And across. This time we're coming out in the middle of this blue stitch that I have just put in on the row below. And we're moving right to left this time, behind the legs of the stitch above, back into the V, the bottom of the V that we started from, and across into the next V. You should start from the bottom and work up every time you do this darning method, because that will give you the sturdiest fabric. Here you can see this is very thin here, so it almost seems too easy to get behind the legs of that V because that yarn is so worn out. Back down into the bottom of the V and across into the next one. behind the legs of the V above, and back down into the bottom of this V. And we have again reached the end of where it needs reinforcing. So when I come through on this one, I want to move up a row, so we're moving from left to right again, through the legs of the V above, back down into the bottom of the V, and across into the side of the next stitch across. Here we are getting to the end of the place where it needs mending. I can see that this stitch that I'm just mending now is thinner than the one below it was. So I will go ahead and go one more stitch. Your mending patch does not need to be all straight edges on every side. It's okay to mend where it needs to be mended and not worry about the places where the stitches are still full strength. We're moving right to left again. And this stitch on the end is wanting to hide a little bit. It's not looking as even as these other stitches. So we're just going to pull that right leg a little bit so that both legs of that V show up neatly. Again, we're now moving right to left. And the stitches are very thin here, so we will be careful. We wouldn't want to snap these and cause a hole while we're trying to do the mending. When you're doing this process, you are actually not securing any of the stitches until you do the row above. So when you work this, you need to work carefully all the way across. It's only secure when you finish doing the row above what you have just worked. So this row of stitches that I have just completed is not secure yet. You can see that they have spaces between them that have not been pulled completely taut. However, the row below is looking very neat, and that is because this row below was secured when I did the row above. The path of the insecure stitches is wider on this row, so we need to move out another stitch to make sure that we are doing our mending into stitches that will be able to hold their structure with this new yarn. Here where the yarn is the thinnest, I want to make sure I don't pull too tightly in these newly sewn stitches, because the fabric is a little bit stretched out of shape in places, and I could make that worse by pulling too tightly on these new stitches. And the stitches on this row are pulling secure. Stitches on the row below that were a bit stretched out because of how thin the remaining fabric was. So we're remembering not to pull too tightly. We're at the end of the row here. We're also coming to the end of this length of yarn that we've used for the mending. I'm going to go ahead and cut a new length of yarn to use to complete this part of the mending process. So here we are with a new length of yarn on our needle. We're going to start at this edge where we left off. Make sure we leave in just enough for weaving in after. Here I have completed the mending on this patch that was worn out on this sock. And all I have left to do now is to weave in these ends. It won't take very much securing for those because they are already woven in pattern with the rest of the knitting. That was a very easy, very simple way of keeping these socks in good shape. I'm going to keep going. There is another spot that's worn on this sock, and of course the matching sock needs some mending as well. But this is such a simple process that you can do while you're sitting down to listen to an audiobook or to watch a film or to listen to music. I would definitely recommend this process for hand knitted socks, as this is the easiest way to mend them. If you wait longer and you get a proper hole in your sock, it's going to take a little more of an in-depth way of doing the mending. So I definitely recommend fixing the problem early so that you don't have a big process involved in fixing it. And these socks should last until the yarn is completely worn out. Hopefully, they will last a very, very long time. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you later.